you hate people and want them to suffer, you'll let these bad ideas be taken seriously and turn into policy in our culture. So the loving thing to do is to undermine those ideas. And mockery and sarcasm and hyperbole and exaggeration and parody are excellent, effective ways to do that.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews joined by Aaron Baer today, and I'm all alone in the studio as Aaron's in parts unknown, but so dedicated to his craft. Actually, what it is he just missed me. We haven't seen each other.
It was really that. It wasn't, historical news being made and one of our biggest guests ever on The Narrative. I don't know what it is about whenever I book vacation, I tend to book it right at the time where everything just goes upside down. I don't know what it is.
Well, now you're hurting my feelings. I thought that our sarcastic comments about all the All-Star Game festivities the past couple of days over text message weren't enough. You needed more, and so you were going to jump on this phone call.
Have a grand narrative episode on All-Star Game uniforms and home run derby national anthems. That's really the hot topics of the day.
That's what's on the top of everyone's mind from our audience. Probably only you and me. No, there's a ton of news. And Troy, exactly. Ton of news to cover, and probably need to do this somewhat chronologically to make the most sense. And I want to jump back to last week with you, Aaron. And we got news of the Republican Party platform was officially ratified, however they make it official. But there were some things in there that were troubling from the Christian perspective. And one thing that we were out in front of was commenting on the weakening of the Republican Party's position on the life issue. And I know we've had internal conversations about it. We put out a statement from you about it, and you've talked to different media outlets about it. So for any of our listeners who might not be aware, can you just kind of tell us what the Republican Party did and why CCV's reaction has been what it is?
Yeah, and again, I say this as we're a nonpartisan organization, but we can speak to issues that are going on all over the country, right? And so we're obviously very critical of what Democrats put in their platform. But the Republican Party platform used to be very strong on issues of life and marriage too, right? Which I think is equally as important, especially if we care about saving unborn children. And so, the previously, the Republican Party platform called for a national legislation to protect unborn children and protected or respected the dignity of marriage between one man and one woman. And in this last iteration, what they just passed removed all of that language, took out marriage entirely, replaced the abortion language with what is really, it sounds like the ranting of a college Republican that just took their first philosophy class or poli-sci 101 class on
cage stage college Republican, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and reciting the 14th Amendment and saying it's an issue, but it's an issue for the states, and it's gobbledygook is the best thing I can come up with for it. I think the bigger thing is just sort of weakened what was a very clear statement. And, it certainly did align the platform much more with where Donald Trump is on the issues. And I think for all of us that have been involved in politics for a long time, we've known, Donald Trump, abortion is not the issue he gets out of bed for, right? And it was an issue we could work with him on, but this was much more where he's at than where we are, which is to, protect life at the point of conception. And so it was, there were a lot of reasons I was frustrated to see this. We signed on to what was called the Platform Integrity Project. I want to give our friends at Family Research Council and American Principles Project and Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America credit for really flagging this issues. And we signed on to that, say, hey, don't change these things. Unfortunately, they did. And I think more than anything, Mike, two things. One, I thought it was bad politics, right? Again, we're not endorsing anybody in this election. But President Trump, if the idea here is we need to soften on abortion, we need to soften this language so that President Trump can win. Well, he won in 2016 on this language when they made it this strong, right? And I don't think anybody would say he lost because of this issue in 2020. And honestly, Mike DeWine and JD Vance both won Ohio on very strong pro-life stances. So it's hard to say that candidates lose because of these issues. So on the one hand, I think it's politically wrong. I also think it's morally wrong. And this is the bigger picture issue that I see going on here, is that we all recognize there's something broken in culture, and we need to rebuild what's been torn apart. And government solutions can only get you so far. You need those. You need to recognize, and what I feel like what the previous platform recognized is that there's things such as marriage and the dignity of life that are the foundations of which good government is based upon. And when we stop acknowledging that, all of our other solutions are always going to be kind of come up short. And so it was disappointing that this happened. Again, I don't think I think for a lot of folks, there's a whole lot of other reasons why they need to be engaged and vote in this election. But at the same time, too, I think for us as Christians that are involved in this process, we have to speak out when something like this goes wrong, especially even if it's our friends on the political right or friends on the political left. If they're doing something that we disagree with, they need to hear from us. And that's why at CCV, we thought it was so important to speak out.
Yeah, and there's a great point you made there too, Aaron. There's so many issues that are going to be prominent in November, but I guess I kind of want to ask the hard question and process a little bit with you of things that have been going through my head, because in some ways I feel like I'm kind of back in 2016 where I was, weighing the candidates and weighing the personalities and all that kind of things. And believe me, I know there have been other things that have happened, and we'll talk about those, but yeah. I'm in this spot where I'm wrestling with the idea of this being part of the party platform and it feeling like it's moving degrees away from where my biblical convictions are, and starting to worry that continuing to vote in a certain direction could just lead for more and more watered down conditions, while fully acknowledging that there is a clear distinction between the two parties. So, I'm just wrestling through that tension. I can't imagine that I'm the only one of our friends out there that's going through this, having seen the Republican Party platform for this year.
Yeah. Again, I think that's spot on, Mike, in a lot of ways. I think there's nothing in Scripture that tells us that this life is going to be an easy one. It's actually to the contrary, right? And so we're always just going to feel a little bit out of place, no matter where we go. Because especially when we're in a non-overt Christian environment. And so the question is, what do we do with that, right? And I think acknowledging it and calling it out is a very first important step, right? And I think that's something that I've seen some folks be afraid to do because they've not wanted to upset people. And I think that's foolish. I think we have to call it out, but then we have to make the decision of like, okay, so is our decision here to proverbially take our ball and go home and check out? Is our decision here to look and say, okay, what are the factions or the folks we can work with to best push and drive? I also think, we have to acknowledge this is where I go back to the vital signs report and see that 1 out of 3 of people in our own churches, weekly attending churchgoers, voted yes on abortion up to birth in Ohio. And it's a sign of when you understand what politics is, which is basically politics is simply just the process of a group of folks deciding what the rules should be, right? Politics is a process. It's nothing more than that. Well, you look at it and say, hey, we don't even have our base secured to be able to push that direction. I think it's really easy to stand up and start saying, hey, look how bad these Republicans are, or these Democrats are. But I think for us as the church, our first response should be to look internally and say, hey, where are we on this? And are we solid? And I think at CCV, what we are acknowledging is, hey, we've got work to do even within the church to shore us up, to drive, and to stay in the game and to stay in the conversation and stay engaged. But recognize we've got some big cultural work to do, including cultural work inside the church right now. And again, that is on top of all these other issues. Again, they put universal school choice in the party platform, which is huge, right? I mean, we've been pushing that for years. Like there's a lot of other stuff in this platform that was there for us to like. I think, again, recognizing the dignity of life and the importance of marriage between a man and a woman are 2 planks that got taken out that deserve to be called out and mourned that they're gone.
Yeah, and a good reminder to us as Christians that our kingdom does not have a platform that aligns with either political party. And we just need that reminder from time to time so that we don't get pulled into a place of idolatry toward a political party specifically.
Amen.
Well, some other news. I don't even know that we need to introduce it. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump was shocking on Saturday. I don't know where you were at the time, Aaron. I was actually out mowing my lawn, and my neighbor came driving over on his lawnmower and was like, "Hey, did you hear the news?" I was like, "No, I've been out here for 20 minutes. What's going on?" And shared the news that there had been an attempt on President Trump's life, and just I was stunned and still seeking to process that and really fully grapple with that whole situation. But just not something that I thought I would see in my lifetime. And I was alive during the attempt on President Reagan's life, but I was so young that I had no recollection of it whatsoever. So this was something totally new and just left me very, I think, jarred is the word that I kept coming back to.
Yeah, no, I think just from a experiential side of it, it had like personally, like it reminded me of 9/11 and just like the historical, like, oh, this is happening. Like this is, you know, honestly, I was here on vacation. My father-in-law and my in-laws came down with us, and I was bringing stuff up from the car, and he said they just shot it. They just shot Trump, and we all just ran to the TV. And seriously, I had that from that same experience of when I was in ninth grade in high school when they said someone flew a plane into the Trade Center, and just that moment of time kind of standing still where you're watching TV and the reality of what's setting in. For me, it was a whole new experience now too, because we're watching this. You know, I want to watch this, and I'm watching with my two daughters, right, my 8 and 5-year-old, and they're trying to understand what's happening, and they're trying to they're asking questions to us, and yeah, I mean, just that point of it, this is going to be forever, to your point, that I think all of us are going to have stories of where were you when this happened, right? And what was that experience like, and what, just talking about it from that perspective. Grace of God, he literally the grace of God that he was not murdered, but for a slight head tilt, he's still with us. But yeah, it really is. One of those moments you recognize we're living in history, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And as the details come out and staying pretty close to the news over the weekend, just seeing the response across the board. And, I don't know about you, Aaron, I've been a little frustrated. I can acknowledge that there's been some unhelpful rhetoric from President Trump at times, but to see some of the finger pointing as if the other side has done nothing to contribute to the heated political state that we have right now has been a challenge for me to engage in from a Christian standpoint, just from, wanting to bring truth, but not wanting to just fan the flames.
Yeah, that honestly, and that's, even in the statement we put out on Monday, I was thinking about writing something on Sunday, and actually the church we go to here, the pastor did a whole service on Sabbath. I know this is something your family does really well, Mike. I just decided, okay, I'm not going to write anything on Saturday. On Sunday, I'm going to wake up Monday morning and pray through and put some thoughts down to send out. And I thought that was the Holy Spirit's encouragement there. I am still angry about it, and I will say, there was a little bit of we got a few messages back on our statement here at CCV of folks saying, "Oh, well, you're calling out the left's rhetoric and the media's rhetoric, but what about those on the right?" Well, listen, it wasn't a politician on the left that was shot at, right? Mm-hmm. Let's be really clear and honest about that, right? This is almost a little bit reminds me of the conversation we just had with Seth Dillon, where let's just speak the honest thing here, right? If nobody said after January 6th, oh, well, the left's look at this rhetoric on the left, or nobody said after what, all those types of things. This was a political leader from the right that was shot at and almost murdered, right? But for a head tilt would have been murdered. So it makes no sense to be, calling those things out right now. Obviously, we should always be trying to do better with our rhetoric, but I think for those of us, and what really hit home for me with CCV, thinking back to the threats I've had personally, we've had employees assaulted at CCV. The Southern Poverty Law Center calls us a hate group. The rhetoric that the left has used for years has been so over the top. I remember when I was in Arizona, and Jan Brewer was signing Governor Jan Brewer was signing an immigration bill there, and I walked out on Capitol Square there, and there were pictures of her as Hitler, and they just acted like this was normal, and it's like, well, if Hitler lives down the street, that's likely going to lead you to violence. And they've been doing this for a long time at an entirely different degree. And I love the way one of my friends put it, a pastor friend of mine put it, which is what the media tends to do is they tend to point to the fringe of the right to show crazy rhetoric. It's mainstream rhetoric on the left that does these things, right? There's a reason why Morning Joe was taken off air on Monday morning, because it's mainstream rhetoric on the left that incites this type of stuff. And for too long, we've beat around the bush on it. And yeah, we can all do better. We should all do better. But we're not actually addressing the problem if we're not honest about, hey, there is a systematic issue on the left with the way they talk and the way they refer to us. Even us at CCV, just for saying that we don't think boys should play in girls' sports and it's wrong to sterilize kids. And they call us bigots, and they put us on a hate map alongside the KKK, right? That's over the top rhetoric that then the media picks up and refers to us as a hate group as, right? This is what their rhetoric does. And at some point they have to recognize what they're doing. I saw some of the coverage from the Dispatch and other outlets, and it's embarrassing, their inability to acknowledge who they are and how they've contributed to where we are today.
And even to wrap up the conversation on this particular story, they kind of gave it away, kind of gave their position away a little bit, because they spend 8 years calling half of the country and Donald Trump Hitler, fascist, that kind of thing, and yet thoughts and prayers. We hope that he makes a speedy recovery. Well, if you really think that this guy is Hitler, then you wouldn't want him to recover.
Why would you want exactly? Who wants Hitler to get better? I mean, it's insane. And again, we've played these games for so long, and again, this is what I really appreciate about the conversation we just had with Seth Dillon is we need to be honest and speak truthfully, even if it is bluntly or even if it is satirically or sarcastically about who the left is. And we get so caught up in, to speak really bluntly about somebody who's meant a lot to me in some ways, but has frustrated me at others. This sort of Tim Keller-ish, both sides-ish, right? Both sides have problems. Yeah, absolutely. But there's massive problems on one side that have led to an assassination attempt, have led to the sterilization of kids, led to all of these issues. And we're not being honest if we're trying to say, well, it's equal on both sides. It's really not right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where it goes to tee up the conversation with Seth again, the idea that you're mocking. It's not a person, it's an idea. And if you promote a bad idea, bad things happen. That's right. That's what we saw over the weekend. Well, last thing we want to cover real quickly is Ohio Senator JD Vance was nominated as the vice president pick for the 2024 election. And just curious, what's your take on Senator Vance? I know there's a decent amount of excitement around CCV when we heard his name called.
Oh yeah, I mean, Senator Vance is a friend. He is a leader unlike few others in the country. Honestly, I have a hard time thinking of a leader in America that really understands what's happening with families today, the structural challenges in America. We just had Brad Wilcox on a while ago. His book Get Married. And Brad, in his book, really documents at the end of his book, really documents how sort of the extreme sort of Marxist policies of the left, so the sort of big government programs, welfare, things like that, have really decimated the sort of low income folks. But then also so has some of this extreme free trade sort of globalist idea of economic policy has decimated the middle class. In America, where there basically isn't a middle class, or the middle class is disappearing more and more because, first and foremost, a lot of those jobs are no longer here that can provide for families that are not necessarily highly educated. But also it's also led to the breakdown of marriage and family. And I still remember the first time when Senator Vance announced he was running for Senate, that we sat down, and we had a long conversation with a friend about marriage and about family. And I left that meeting saying, this guy understands this at a core level, obviously both because of his personal story, but also because he's looked into this, right? And it's led him to a really sincere Catholic faith. And I always say too, when you look at JD, um, you know, you look at the Catholics he's surrounded himself with, and these aren't your get along to go along to get along Catholics. These are your hardcore Catholics out there that really one, understand Catholic theology, but also understand the implications it has for the culture and for the world around us. And so it's hard to imagine being more excited about a VP pick, especially understanding the moment we're in. That's a big thing for me right now is, do we have leaders that understand the moment we're in? That was my big knock on Governor DeWine when he vetoed the SAFE Act, was he doesn't understand the moment we're in to veto a bill like that. JD Vance understands the moment we're in.
And yet, Aaron, as we try and hold some things in tension here and try and call out what we need to call out or explain what we need to get understanding around JD Vance, he made some pretty public comments about the abortion pill lately. So I think his pro-life credentials are pretty strong. He was at the Ohio March for Life with us last year. So just take us through the comments and help us try and understand how we can still be excited about JD as a vice presidential candidate in light of those comments.
Yeah, this was one that was really frustrating for me when I saw it. He was on, I believe it was MSNBC or just NBC, doing an interview after the most recent FDA abortion pill case that got sent back down to a lower court. The Supreme Court sent it back down to a lower court on a standing issue. And Senator Vance was doing the interview, and in a very weird moment for what I would say for the guy that I know, the reporter asked him, "Hey, well, do you support access to mifepristone, which is the abortion pill?" And he said yes. And that blew up online, rightfully so, with pro-life Christians. And I spoke out and said, "Hey, this is wrong. We should not support access to mifepristone." So let me say a few things on that. One, I think one bad interview or one bad question, I don't think should completely define someone's pro-life stance. We saw Senator Vance, and actually the Cleveland Plain Dealer called this out. In the primary last year, he ran or in 2022, he ran as a very pro-life candidate, and then he didn't take down his pro-life stance off his website after the fact. He stood by it and beat a very strong candidate in Tim Ryan. Through the abortion amendment, he fought side by side with us and spoke, came to the March for Life, spoke out, helped us fundraise, was a real strong advocate for us in this. I think, so I'd say this. One, I've let JD know I disagreed with that comment. I don't think JD has changed his views on the importance of protecting unborn children. I encourage people to go read the thread that he posted right after the lost the abortion amendment. And this is why I'm excited and why I still say JD is a pro-life senator, a pro-life vice president, is JD understands the cultural time we're in, the cultural moment we're in, understands the vast amount of work we need to do to change culture, but also push politically to protect life. I think JD in the administration is going to be a friend to the pro-life cause and help drive the most realistic path forward for us. I think what we need to recognize is that it's our job, not just as CCV, but also as Christians and pro-lifers, to create a field, to create a culture that pro-life policies can win. And I think in the most realistic sense of where we are today, having someone like JD Vance in the administration is a massive benefit for the pro-life cause. right? We could very easily say we're going to take the purist stance here and just check out of this. And I will tell you that will save no lives, not today and not in the future. We have some serious work we need to do. And that starts with our witness. That also starts with relationship. And that also starts with supporting those people who we know are strong. I've told multiple people, this is not a Rob Portman moment on marriage, right? That interview was not JD Vance making a grand statement on a change of his position on life. This was one interview that needs to be taken into context of everything else he's done and said, and the people he surrounded himself with, and the people that know him. And I believe for pro-lifers, if our goal is to try to save as many lives today and put ourselves in position long term to save as many lives over the next several decades, having somebody like JD Vance in the White House or in the administration is a major benefit for the cause.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the clarity and the context on that, Aaron, as always, and grateful you took time to jump on the news segment here to unpack what was a pretty substantial week in the news week and a half really of news. And I guess your pina colada is probably getting warm now, so you might want to get back to it before it melts on you.
No, I gotta say, I love our CCB team because I can come out here and have some good time relaxing with my girls and family. But at the same time too, I love what we do. I miss you guys. I do miss you, Mike. I miss the team. I miss it. It's still surreal that we get to do this work. And this is gonna be, I'll tell you, these next 6 months, these next 5 months are gonna be transformational. So make sure you're at the Essential Summit. Make sure you're getting ready to get voter guides and all that good stuff as we're gearing up for the big push, because man, is it going to be a fun few months coming up.
Yeah, and a really good preview of the Essential Summit coming up in just a moment with our interview with Seth Dillon. Hope everybody enjoys that because it's coming up next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and I am so thrilled to welcome into the podcast today our special guest, Seth Dillon. He's the CEO of the Babylon Bee, the world's most trusted, factually accurate news source. And I think Snopes has actually fact-checked that and proven that to be true. Taking on the tone of the world's traditional news media publication, the Babylon Bee satirizes real-world events and public figures. I'm pretty sure all of our audience knows who the Babylon Bee is, but Seth also brings some experience with censorship and deplatforming. He's been an outspoken voice on that. It's placed him on the front lines of the battle for free speech in the public square, and he speaks across the country about the effectiveness of humor, the moral imperative of mockery, and the dangers of censorship. Seth, thanks so much for joining The Narrative, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
So I'm a big fan of the Babylon Bee. I feel like I was one that the algorithm targeted early on in those early days before you were even associated with it. And I've followed the Bee ever since. I'm just a huge fan, but I've got to ask, is there anything for you guys to talk about these days? I mean, it hardly seems like there's much going on, right?
Yeah, maybe a little too much, but it is funny. The more insane the world becomes, the harder satire becomes, if we're being honest, because we have to exaggerate what's going on in the world, and that can be very challenging. And it's something that my writers struggle with, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I have to admit, I do listen to the podcast. It's one of my routine commute entertainments that I have on regularly, and when they go back and do the Bee prophecies that have been fulfilled, it's kind of uncanny the number of times they got so close to the mark of something that you just assumed was absurd and then actually ends up coming true in reality.
The MAGA hat World War II one you just had, like,
yeah.
like the helmet that I saw that one, Seth.
Well, if you remember early on, the reason I wrote that joke was because Trump supporters were literally getting assaulted and harassed in public. If they would wear a MAGA hat, it was likely you were going to get like beat up depending on where you were. And so it was actually dangerous to be a Trump supporter in public. And now, so we did a joke about how, Trump was selling MAGA helmets instead of MAGA hats. And of course, now you look at today and Trump is actually being shot at. So it's wild. The things just keep escalating and going in that direction of absurdity, which is sad, but it's all the more reason why we need to, inject a little bit of levity and mock what deserves it.
Seth, I was going to ask along those lines. I think that one place that the Babylon Bee has really been so helpful for Christians and conservatives is that we hear ourselves in the Bee's articles and stuff like that. And it seems like venues like the Babylon Bee or Daily Wire that really come alongside and say the thing that you're thinking as a Christian, but aren't sure that you have the permission to say out loud, just opens up the door for dialogue and for us to be ourselves in the public square. Is that something that you've noticed as you talk to people and as you go around promoting the dangers of censorship and things like that?
Well, yeah, there's definitely an atmosphere of chilled speech in our culture because you have consequences because of the cultural and institutional power that the secular progressive left holds. They've been able to impose consequences on people who speak freely, and it's everything from the cancel culture stuff to just having to be mindful of what you say online because you might end up getting your account dinged or throttled or at worst suspended. So with people realizing that that's the case and knowing that they might pay a price for saying what they think and what they believe, they are censoring themselves. And so what they're doing is they're actually engaging in by engaging in self-censorship, they're doing the tyrant's work for him, which I think is really dangerous. There's of course what I call hard censorship, which is when they take down your content, and then there's the soft censorship of people who are muzzling themselves because they fear consequences for their speech. And there's only one way to break out of that, as far as I can tell, because that's self-imposed censorship, and that's to embolden other people to speak the truth, and regardless of what the consequences might be. And it takes some people having the courage and the willingness to lose something, being outspoken in order to embolden other people to do that. It's extremely common that people need that kind of permission from seeing someone else being able to take those risks before they're willing to do it themselves. We have this tendency to conform to whatever the majority is, or just to not look like an outlier, and be the odd one out who's willing to say that 2 and 2 make 4, or that men can't get pregnant. You got to be willing to say what's true, come what may.
Absolutely, man. And I think even too with some of those things, especially with men can't get pregnant, I've just seen in just normal debates with the left, they want to try to get you argue on all these side issues, and it's like, well, at the end of the day, women don't have testicles, right? Like we know that. Let's start there and build on that. But I do. Seth, I want to, you just spoke at the ADF summit, and we're looking forward to having you at our summit here in October. But what I want to ask is more specifically to the church, because you guys aren't just another sort of conservative outlet. You're Christians. Mm-hmm. And I know for a lot of Christians, they struggle. There's some folks that say they struggle with using satire, say they struggle with with teasing folks, but they really just want to try to stop the right from saying things. But as a Christian, how does using satire, how does poking fun, how does using sarcasm, and even sometimes pretty biting sarcasm, how is that even a tool for our mission and purpose here on this earth?
It's a great question. And I get that question a lot from Christian audiences because when you start talking about things like mockery and ridicule, there's very negative connotations there, and it doesn't sound very loving. But I argue that there's a moral imperative for Christians to be engaged in mockery. And in the way that I justify that, and the argument for that is that there are bad ideas that have catastrophic consequences if they're taken seriously. These are bad ideas that will lead to extreme harm, particularly for children. We're talking about radical gender ideology, which is a good example, a current example today. This is an example of an idea that our culture is currently purposefully planting in the minds of children so that they become confused about who and what they are. And then we treat that confusion with affirmation and surgery, which sterilizes and mutilates their bodies and does irreversible damage to them. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you would do if you hate children and want them to suffer. And so to mock an idea like that, to bring mockery to bear on it, there's an example I give of a joke that Bill Maher told when he was talking about how the transgender stuff is taking over and has become so popular. And it's just so absurd that we would be listening to kids when they tell us what they identify as and who they are, because kids, when they're like 6, 7, 8 years old, they want to be things like cowboys and princesses. And you can't just affirm that and say, okay, fine, you're a cowboy or a princess. And then permanently for the rest of their life, we treat them as a cowboy or princess. That's ridiculous. The world would be filled with adult cowboys and princesses, which is madness. And he's like, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a pirate. Thank God no one scheduled me for peg leg surgery and eye removal. And you hear that joke and it's like, that's an important joke. And from a Christian perspective, it's an important joke, because what that joke is doing is what you're not doing is trying to make people feel bad about themselves and put them down. This is not bullying. What this joke does is it chips away at the validity of an idea that never should have been taken seriously in the first place, which is this idea that you can be a girl trapped in a boy's body and that surgery and drugs are necessary to fix that problem. These are really, really poisonous and dangerous ideas. And if we were making fun of them and laughing at them, then our culture wouldn't be adopting them as the prescription to a problem that doesn't exist. And so it's the fact that we've taken these things so seriously that's gotten us into this place. So that's the short version of my argument for the moral imperative of mockery, is that there are bad ideas, and it echoes and parallels. There's something that C.S. Lewis said. He said, good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered. And that's really why we need good philosophy. Otherwise, it's kind of unnecessary to really have good philosophy most of the time. It's ultimately necessary when there are bad ideas that are proliferating. You need to be able to answer them. And there's a couple of different ways to deal with bad ideas. You can refute them and you can ridicule them. And in some cases, refutation only gets you so far. A lot of people have abandoned rationality on purpose, and you can't really appeal to their reason, but you can ridicule their bad ideas so that they aren't taken seriously. So I think it's perfectly loving to do that, because like I said before, if you hate people and want them to suffer, you'll let these bad ideas be taken seriously and turn into policy in our culture. So the loving thing to do is to undermine those ideas. And mockery and sarcasm and hyperbole and exaggeration and parody are excellent, effective ways to do that. It was Chesterton who said, humor can get in under the door while seriousness is still fumbling at the handle.
I want to drill in on that more, Seth, because I'm thinking about seeing you at ADF last week, and I think ADF was the legal force behind fighting gay marriage, right? The Obergefell decision. They argued in that case. Obviously, we at CCV led the marriage amendment campaign in Ohio in 2004. But that was one of these things where, from a legal side, from a practical side, it's still absolutely insane to suggest the U.S. Constitution says anything about marriage, right? Mm-hmm. A right to any marriage, gay marriage, straight marriage. It just doesn't talk about marriage, right? And to now all of a sudden we've created this, and I feel like it's only been in maybe the last few years, and I think the Babylon Bee is the best example of this, of the right. I feel like we have been trapped in this. We're going to have logical arguments. We're going to have reasoned arguments and legal. And this is not knocking ADF. ADF is a legal firm. They should be arguing legal cases. But as a movement, we've not had the institutions on the right to fight this bigger cultural battle. What's your perspective on that? And where do you see that going for the right and for Christians broadly, maybe just more specifically the church? Where do you see that going for us in the future?
Well, it's certainly true that we don't currently hold the cultural and institutional power. And it's kind of the reason why the Babylon Bee got its name. The Babylon Bee got its name because the idea was, the Hebrew people were in exile in Babylon. And the idea is that today, this is a Christian satire site. The idea is that Christian conservatives are really on the outskirts. They're marginalized. They are not the predominant power And so in that sense, we are culturally in exile. And so these are dispatches from exile. That's why it's called the Babylon Bee. And I think that it's when you don't have that when you don't have that power, you're not wielding that power. The best that you can do is challenge it with the tools that you have. I think humor is one very effective way of doing that. But we do need, it would be nice if there was more that was happening from our perspective in an organized way where we could mobilize in opposition to what, we're facing with these big tech companies and all the power that they have, the education institutions, these large corporations, the government itself. The right is far less effective than the left at leveraging whatever power they do have to shape society and culture and values in the way that they want to see them shaped. We definitely need to get better at that. Part of the way that we will have an impact, I think, on the cultural conversation is by making good content. And I would like to see more conservatives and Christians focused on making not just conservative content or Christian content, but good content. It's another distinction that C.S. Lewis made when he said, and this is a little bit of a paraphrase of what he said, we don't need more Christian books. We need more good books written by Christians. And I think that's one of the ways that we will actually, have more of an impact on society is by focusing on that. So I think that answers your question to some extent anyway. It's about making really good content when it comes to cultural impact. But from a legal perspective, you mentioned ADF and the event that we were just at there. What they're doing is very important because, they are the battle for what you're allowed to say and what you're allowed to do is taking place in the courtroom right now. And they are taking up these cases and fighting for our constitutional right to just exist as Christians and conservatives, because what the left is trying to do is make it illegal to have our views and values. And organizations like ADF are pushing back on that and establishing legal precedent by winning these court cases that defends our right to speak about and to profess our beliefs. And so that is vitally important. So while it's very radically different from what we do, we have to attack it from multiple angles.
Speaking of the content piece, Seth, I'd love to get your take on just where we are as Christians and conservatives in terms of producing that content. I just know as a dad, we go to the Bees YouTube page a lot. That's something we like to do as a family when we're watching stuff. But, we've got Angel Studios, Daily Wire. It seems like there are some organizations that are producing excellent things of great quality. So where do you think we are at this moment, just as a conservative media landscape? And what do we still need to do to continue driving this forward?
Well, all of that is good. I applaud Daily Wire all the time. They're out there. They're in the arena. They get sniped at a lot, just like we do. We get a lot of attacks, including friendly fire from our own side all the time. No one's going to be perfect and produce the best possible stuff, but the fact that they're out there in the arena and fighting the good fight is certainly very admirable. And I'd like to see more of that. And I'd like to see less of these people, sneering and sniping from the sidelines when they're not actually in the arena doing anything. Mm-hmm. There is to some extent, I think, a problem with conservative content production where we're targeting our own audiences too much with content that just is meant to serve them. I think you end up creating kind of these silos, these ideological echo chambers, and you don't end up reaching the broader culture, especially if you're sticking content behind a paywall that only your most serious supporters are going to be accessing. I'd like to see more stuff being put out there. I think Angel Studios is doing a pretty good job with that. They're reaching a lot of people on a really broad scale with content that's high quality, and they're making it available for free so that it can have as much reach and impact as possible. Quality is the most important thing, though, and there need to be more people doing it. I was having a conversation earlier today with someone who's making video games, and they're doing some big budget video games from a non-woke conservative perspective. And I'm hopeful that they're quality. It needs to be. They need to be quality. If it's a cheap, chintzy version, then we'll always just be. Then conservative Christian content will always just be a weaker, lesser knockoff of what the secular progressives have always done better than us. And we have to rise to that level and be willing to meet them on their own ground and offer something as good as what they're providing in terms of quality, or it will never have the impact that we want it to have. So I think we need to be encouraging and supporting organizations like the Daily Wire and Angel Studios and others who are getting into the fray and fighting that fight. The more money they have, the more impact they're going to be able to have, the better quality they're going to be able to do. So we need to support them and show others. If you see, the success that Daily Wire and Angel are having should be inspiring others to jump in and do this, because there's money to be made there. It's not just that you can have an impact, you can run a profitable business.
Yeah.
So huge opportunity there. I just want to see more people leveraging it.
Yeah. I want to, you talked a little bit about big tech a little bit ago. I want to drill in there a little bit more. First and foremost, just with Elon, I feel like we've watched this massive evolution of Elon Musk. Again, maybe it's actually just the meme where the left has gone so far left and Elon's not actually moved. But thinking back to when he first came on your guys' podcast, to buy in Twitter and all these types of things. Are you surprised to see, like, he came out and full-throated endorsed Trump after the attempted assassination? What's your perspective on Elon Musk, and what's sort of his historical legacy and what's happening in America right now?
Well, his legacy, I think, is going to be profound. He's one of the most important figures in modern American history. He's having a massive impact, and I think it's really cool that his impact has gone just beyond technology and innovation, and is bleeding into issues of great importance to culture and society. I think that's really cool to see that he's decided that wokeness and some of these bad ideas that I'm talking about, that we spend so much of our energy fighting, are things that he also thinks are worth fighting, because of the damage that can result from them being proliferating and being taken seriously. So I think it is true that the window has moved and shifted. The left has gone further and further left, so that Elon is probably on most issues positioned kind of left of center. He might overall, if you balance it all, be kind of like right in the middle, but that makes him look like he's far right with how far the left has gone left. Yeah. So because he believes that radical gender ideology isn't good for kids, and because he believes that people should be allowed to speak freely, even if they say something that the liberal elites don't think should be allowed to be said, that makes him like a far right extremist as far as the left is concerned. So I don't think it's so much that he's gone through this radical transformation. I do think that he's certainly become more alarmed and is deciding to get more active. He's never been as politically active as he is right now, and pledging all of this money. It just came out that he's pledging $45 million a month to help, Trump get reelected. He's putting his money where his mouth is and getting very involved. But I mean, the biggest example of that was when he bought Twitter, right? $44 billion.
Yeah.
We gave him an IOU for that, which I don't think we're going to be able to pay back.
On a napkin, I believe.
On a napkin. But
I want to ask though, real quick, with these guys, like with the Elon Musks, with the Joe Rogans, you've interacted with them. These are guys that, like you said, they've become more alarmed by what they're seeing on the left right now, right? But they make outright moral claims as well, but they also don't ground those moral claims in anything eternal and true, right? And this is one of these things that on the one hand, I cheer them on the other hand, I'm like, well, what's keeping your worldview from sliding there anyway? Have you had the chance to talk to these guys? How do they respond to the Jesus question, or how do they respond to okay, so what's the basis by which you're making a truth claim, right? This is what you're seeing a lot of the new atheists kind of wrestle with today. What's their response when you're engaged? Because you've had some pretty meaningful conversations with these guys.
Yeah, well, that's always been the problem for the atheists, who, on the one hand, are so quick to say that that the God of the Bible is immoral if he exists, and Christians are immoral because they oppose whatever it is, same-sex marriage or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, on what basis are you making moral judgments? At least we have one. You don't.
Right.
That's always been a problem for the atheists, because on their view, really the best explanation for moral behavior is that it's a biological, it's a socio-biological adaptation where we've just developed, because of the need for survival, this desire to get along with each other and coordinate with each other and cooperate with each other and be nice to each other, because it means less death and suffering or something like that. But there's no real objective ontological foundation for moral values, which I think is what you're getting at there. And yeah, they do lack that. It is the case that whether you are an atheist or a Christian or anything in between, we all, and this is the important thing, and there's tremendous evidence for this, we all recognize that there's a moral standard. We all recognize that there are things that are wrong. We may disagree about what some of those things are, but we all recognize that right and wrong are real. And the atheist may not be able to provide a good, solid foundation for that, but they still believe it. They still know it because God's written it on their hearts. Whether they want to admit it or not, they have perception of this objective moral realm. They can access it. They feel guilty when they do some wrong to somebody else, and they're eager to point the finger when they see someone else behaving badly. So they understand that there is a moral realm. They just don't have a foundation for it. The people who get it right on the moral questions, I mean, it's good to lock arms with them in agreement that these things are wrong. I don't see that as an opportunity to get contentious with them, but it does make for interesting conversations when you say, okay, well, what is your reason though for thinking that these things are really wrong, and have that kind of deeper metaphysical, theological conversation about it. We have had some of those conversations with Elon. Some of them, publicly. We did go back and forth with him a little bit in our first interview, talking about Jesus and miracles and whether Christianity is true. And I asked him, I asked him an interesting question, because, his worldview seems to be that we should keep one of the main things that we need to be concerned with from a moral perspective. One of the main imperatives is that we need to keep human consciousness going. We need to keep the candle of consciousness lit for as long as possible, because it's like a light in a vast darkness. And my question is, well, why? Why do we need to do that? What's the reason? If the universe is eventually going to end in heat death, and it will, then what difference does it make if human consciousness survives a little bit longer than it otherwise would have? There doesn't really seem to be a good reason for that. And the answer just is, well, we just should. It's just, I just feel that we should. It becomes this default axiomatic thing that you have to put a value on something, and this is what I'm going to assign value to, and this is what I'm going to make my worldview all about. But I think that can be, it's very arbitrary, and it's not really grounded in anything other than some kind of intuition. And so it does make for interesting conversations, though, because we're then able to say, well, here's what we believe and why we believe it. And so Elon, to his credit, is not dogmatic about these things. He's very open to having conversations about what other people believe, why they believe it. And he's open to being convinced that something else could be true that he hasn't affirmed if he sees, good arguments and evidence for it.
Hey, Seth, thanks so much for the conversation today. I really enjoyed it. Again, if you want to check out the Babylon Bee, it's online, babylonbee.com, X, formerly known as Twitter. You can also follow along their YouTube channel. Lots of great content out there. And for people who want to hear Seth in person, the Essential Summit will be in downtown Columbus on Thursday, October 3rd. Get your tickets right now at essentialsummit.org. And if you buy before July 31st with the code EARLYBIRD20, you can get $20 off your ticket. So hopefully lots of people will come out and hear Seth in person. And we're so grateful to have had you as our guest today on The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.